This week, Matt McGuirk from Source Defense is with us to discuss web app client-side risk. Then Ian Glazer from Salesforce joins us to talk about their journey towards MFA across all their customers. Finally, in the enterprise security news, funding is back in preparation for RSA, I assume. Devo raises $100 million and becomes our 56th unicorn. Jupiter One raises $70 million and becomes our 57th unicorn. Open source projects get some security funding. 10 more funding announcements. Mimecast has been taken private and is now delisted from the NASDAQ. ReliaQuest acquires Digital Shadows. We talk about public and private market performance. The cybersecurity skills crisis gets worse. Potentially, we'll talk about it. Expired certs plus IoT devices equals pain. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
Is your team ready to defend against the latest cyber threats? Validate human cyber defense readiness with RangeForce. Sharpen your team's capabilities with a cloud-based platform that takes a real-world, continuous approach to cybersecurity skills development. RangeForce empowers cyber defense readiness at scale with hundreds of interactive modules, learning paths mapped to industry frameworks, skill assessments, and team-based defensive threat exercises. Visit securityweekly.com/RangeForce to learn more.
Imagine this scenario. You're out of the office unexpectedly, and a colleague pings you because they need access to some system you have credentials for. Now, my listeners would never send passwords over email or Slack. But what about your coworkers? How many organizations out there are sending logins back and forth in plain text? Worse yet, how many just store all of their logins on a shared spreadsheet? Keeper Security's password management platform locks down logins, payment cards, and more in a patented zero-knowledge encrypted vault. Sign up for a Keeper free trial today. Visit securityweekly.com/Keeper.
Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly, and happy Leave the Office Early Day today. This is episode 276, recorded on Thursday, June 2nd, 2022. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me is the Master of Marketing, the Mayor of Mayhem. A big welcome back to Tyler Shields. How are you feeling, Tyler?
Thank you. Doing well, recovering nicely. Had a little surgery, and I'm back at it. I love the introduction, by the way. Thank you.
Absolutely. Also joining me is the Czar of Zero Trust, the Captain of Content, Katie Teitler. How are you, Katie?
I am well, thank you, Adrian.
And I think today, like whenever we record this, it's basically Leave the Office Early Day for us, right? I don't know. Tyler goes back to work. Sometimes he has meetings after this.
You know, it's hard to maintain a second big head like this without working super late at night. So
you gotta fill that head with something. You gotta feed it.
I do, and actually, here, just to give you an idea of how large that second head truly is.
That is a big head.
Yeah, I'm not even. It's like literally held right next to my head here. So yeah, it's pretty big.
Oh my God, it didn't look nearly that big, leaning against a wall back there.
Yeah, I got to keep it subtle.
So this day, actually kind of interesting. There's a big speaker and writer in the world of employee productivity, Laura Stack, who created National Leave the Office Early Day, because here in the U.S. we tend to work a lot of unpaid overtime, and she wanted to declare a Leave the Office Early Day as a reminder for employees to take time for themselves.
I think
that's
a
couple of countries that have 40 work weeks, or are thinking about 40 work weeks. Iceland, Belgium. So I don't know if that's leave the office early or just better sanity.
Some of the
shorter work week, right?
And some of the companies in the United States are now doing, I know of at least one or two high-tech cyber companies that are doing they're calling it a mental health Friday, one Friday a month. So that's at least kind of getting partially the way there.
Yeah.
In the past, we've talked about having, dedicating a day to just, getting your stuff together, getting organized. I remember back when I used to do consulting, I'd often use my Fridays because, often I wouldn't be traveling on Fridays. So that's when I would do all my expenses and like get one client's data kind of organized and tied up and put to bed and, start looking into what my next thing was going to be. And I don't want to do that stuff on the weekend like that. I think Friday's kind of the perfect day to like go through the week and reflect and, tie up any loose ends and stuff like that. Like I like using a day for something like that, like maybe half a day, right? Make Friday half a day.
I'm a big fan of that. Let's forever make all Fridays in high tech be off, and we don't do anything. I don't want to do anything on those Fridays. I just want to have a 3-day weekend. Call me greedy.
Yeah.
Greedy's okay. Yep. I think also it's probably different now that we're all working at home, but certainly in actual offices, there's a whole lot of time that's wasted. And if you really put your head down, a lot of the time you can get things done if you don't have interruptions, if you're, not having meetings about things that could be emails. Mm-hmm. Fridays at my company tend to be light on meetings, and I get so much done because I just sit there and work through the list of things I want or need to do. And yeah, I can clock out an hour early and it doesn't matter because I've done all the things I want. But that's only because there aren't weird interruptions or awkward water cooler talk, which used to happen when I was in an office, talking to somebody about their weekend. And you're like, I really don't care. I have this thing to go right.
Right. Yep. No, that's I don't miss that stuff at all. Like I like more purposeful conversations. Like it doesn't have to have a topic, but having a conversation when both parties choose to have it, not when you're ambushed at your cubicle or your desk or your office or something like that by somebody.
And with Slack, it's
prefer to talk
really
than work.
Easy just to put on Do Not Disturb if somebody starts talking about. I stubbed my toe on this thing, or my brother's cousin's dog sitter's friend's third, twice removed, whomever just died, and now I'm grieving. Whatever the case may be, you just click that little button, Do Not Disturb, and you're good to go.
Yeah.
Wow, I sound terrible. I'm not a terrible person, I promise.
No, I mean, I think a lot of people would wholeheartedly agree with you there. All right, moving on. One announcement here. So you can still save $100 on your RSA conference pass if you haven't bought one by now. If you haven't scheduled for whatever reason, if you actually have a hotel room or a place to stay in San Francisco, and you're planning on going to RSA, but for some reason have not bought a pass, you can still save $100 on it. Discount code is 52UCyber, and you can do that at securityweekly.com/RSAC 2022. And many of us will be there. Katie, Tyler, will you both be there? I don't remember.
Nope, not me.
I will be going to the competing event on the opposite coast.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I knew that. I totally knew that. You had mentioned that.
I'm sending both. I'm sending team members to that competing event. I'm sending team members to the RSA event. We have tons of
Gartner
stuff.
Okay,
we're
those
not
guys
competing
with Gartner. You guys can say the Gartner risk and
the G word.
Summit.
Yeah, but it's worse. That's worse than a 4-letter word. So we'll leave it at that. But no, we're sending some folks to the Gartner event. I'm sending some folks to the RSA event. We have the Summer of Jupiter 1 this summer with events all over the place. And I'm like, look, I'm not traveling for any of it, so I'm just staying home.
It's Summer of Jupiter 1.
It's a thing.
Okay, cool.
Do you get to play music from the musical Hair while you do it?
I'm not sure I'm making the connection there, but I don't have a whole lot of hair, so I don't know.
Yeah, okay. I'll sing it off air. I'm not going to sing on air for sure, but okay. I'll sing the song. It'll be good. You'll love it.
I cannot wait to hear it.
All right, moving on. This interview that we have today is sponsored by Source Defense. I was lucky enough to stand in last night on Paul's Security Weekly and had a great conversation with Paul and Matt last night. And that'll be the So what we're going to talk about today is going to be a little bit different. But if you listen to today's conversation and you want more, you can just roll back to the previous episode of Paul's Security Weekly and check out that hour-long interview there that gets a little bit more technical. Same guest, same topic, just goes a little bit deeper. So today's topic is client-side security in web apps. And we have Matt McGuirk. Am I saying that right, Matt?
You got it. That's it.
McGuirk. Okay. I didn't want to say it more than twice wrong.
I appreciate that. And I also probably would have let it go after a certain point, but then I would have kind of thought about it afterwards. So I appreciate the clarity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've got one of those names too. So, I try and be thoughtful.
Yeah, somewhere at Ellis Island or whatever, the E got smeared, and now I've been a McGuirk for my whole life. So say lovey.
Nice. Instead of a McGuire, do you think?
McGuire, I assume, is where we probably start. I'm not much from genealogy, though.
All right. And you are a solution architect at Source Defense. And yeah, let's just jump into it. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
And I guess just to clarify, when we say client side, could you kind of orient the audience in terms of what kind of attack surface we're talking about, like where this whole conversation is going to land?
Yeah, of course. And just by way of background, I'm a solution architect. I'm a technical guy. I also work with our product teams and our marketing teams, a bunch of folks. So I'm happy to keep it a little higher level than we did on the technical segment. But yeah, it's a great question. Client side in this thing we're talking about means in a web application. And it means not the server side of the application that we, as organizations, we develop and host internally or et cetera. It's about the part that gets served out to the website visitors. So if you have a customer or end user facing website, you need to be concerned about what's happening when that front end is another word for client side, when the front end of that web application is out there on everybody's computers where they're using it to interact with the business and generate revenue or get customer service or so on and so forth. There's a unique security problem within the front end that until about 5 years ago has gone completely unaddressed.
Yeah, and now I guess maybe give us the elevator pitch kind of on what Source Defense does with that attack surface.
Sure. So what we've seen over the past, we were founded about 9 years ago, and we went in purpose-built to do this. And what we identified was that the browser doesn't give people responsible for the security of their web app any controls around how that stuff behaves once it's out in the wild in the visitor's web browser. So the goal at Source Defense is to provide a real-time preventative approach to what we call client-side security. So giving folks a way to control the behavior of the website. So if somebody bad gets into that web page, they can't change what it looks like or what it does. And also so that attackers can't steal data like payment card data or user logins or so on from the web page directly through the browser, or more recently in a governance and regulatory and compliance kind of sense, making sure that any outside integration, so if you're putting analytics or chat tools or other stuff, social media into your customer facing web pages, that those outside vendors, as they run right in your visitor's web browser, don't have any more access to visitor data than they absolutely need.
So, real quick question for you, Matt. What are the real threat vectors that exist in the browser, right? So in a very simplistic way of thinking of client side, not attacks, but the way client side is set up, browser makes a request, server sends a response, right? Pulls whatever data from its backend, sends a response. Where does the risk occur in that model, and what's the actual attack vectors that you tend to see in the wild there? Sure.
So there's basically two different, what I would describe as vectors. The end goal, like you identified, is to get JavaScript, malicious JavaScript, into a web browser. Let's categorize them as first-party vectors and third-party. So a first-party problem is really any security problem that your web properties might have. The goal of the attacker is to get a JavaScript file on there, so it goes out to the visitor, and the attacker has way more latitude about what they can do once they control the browser. So that would be something like For a long time, we saw scores of misconfigured Amazon S3 buckets being compromised in an automated fashion. It can also be a direct attack against the platform itself. So that's where the term, if anyone's familiar, the term Mage Cart came from. Is the Mage in that refers to Magento, the e-commerce shopping platform that's now owned by Adobe. And then another case for first party would be a developer integrates an open source library that had a piece of malware, through a pull request put into it. So lots of different scenarios, but basically any of the vectors that everybody should be protecting against, as well as some more novel ones. The third-party thing is a little more difficult to control or non-traditional. Let's go with that word, where these integrations, like I mentioned, just a handful, but on average, any customer-facing website is going to have something like 5 to 15, depending on industry and other stuff. But those integrations, the browser by the web page is literally instructed to download code from another server and execute it. So now you've extended the surface to all of those servers that belong to the vendors and anything that might happen to them. So again, it's in the domain of web application vulnerability through which the JavaScript would arrive, but it is, that surface is spread across all of those other parties. And then the last thing I'll mention before I, give it some air is things that aren't even the result of an exploit exactly, like buying ad space on advertising networks. This was a practical example where attackers bought ad space targeted at members of German parliament and then duped up some convincing ads to click here, and that got malware on their computers at the end of it for political gain. So it's that kind of thing where there really isn't a compromise at some point, but there's clever, tradecraft on the attacker side.
Gotcha. And how does source defense or tools in general, it doesn't have to be source defense, but how does a tool in general then protect against that? Because isn't there a certain level of, hey, as a owner of the original website, like certainly for many of the third-party threat vectors and potentially even some of the first-party threat vectors, I have no control over that, right? My code sent, the browser went, and somebody compromised some third-party system that got the JavaScript embedded, and I'm toast. How does the tool actually protect against that?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll just give some more foundational stuff and talk about what we do. But, a traditional approach to this is, if I'm a security practitioner, let's remove all the third-party stuff from the website. And, well-intentioned, but you're going to get murdered by your marketing department effectively. The second thing would be to do some kind of code analysis, like point in time. Like we're going to not just do a third-party risk assessment, we're going to do a literal third-party code review. And I have heard folks do that, but it's just the commitment from developer time is kind of nuts. There's some stuff in the HTTP spec, but I'll leave that to the other more technical conversation that's available. What we do at Source Defense is take kind of a isolation and behavioral control idea. So put simply, we sandbox JavaScript on the fly inside of the web page and then apply behavioral control, saying, these are the two things that an analytics integration needs to do to work. It can do those two things and nothing else. And then by monitoring and controlling the behavior of that analytics tool in real time, we can make sure, one, that it doesn't interact with the actual live page, it's still sandboxed. Two, if it starts doing something malicious, we actually stop it before it has, let's say, consequence for either the visitor or the organization hosting the web app. And then the third thing is you can control what data is exposed to those vendors, meaning that by not putting any data that shouldn't be there in the sandbox, we never have the risk of that stuff being exposed to anyone who shouldn't have it. So to sum up, we basically introduced the security controls that really should have been in browsers in the first place, but never were there.
So you just mentioned a few ways that you tackle it behind the scenes on the source defense side, but what about, you had mentioned a little while back about giving users control. So what do you mean about user, and what kind of control are we talking about?
Sure, of course. Yeah, maybe I mixed my terms there a little bit. So I think what I mean in that sense is we want to give the owners of a web application ways to control the behavior of both their outside integrations and their own code once their web app is kind of up and running on their end user's computer, whether that's the visitor to a commercial website or, someone logging into an employee portal, or a healthcare company having, their patient, their kind of constituent management system. So what we want to do, basically, just the same way that, if you were shipping, quote unquote, if you were putting software on your endpoints in your enterprise, you wanted to control what goes out there and how it behaves. We want to do the same thing conceptually, but inside the web page that you're shipping out every time somebody hits the website. So that's what I mean by control. And
so this is transparent to the user, the employee, the consumer, the whomever.
Right. Yeah, I usually sum that up with website visitor. It's tricky, though, especially in these conversations. There's a lot of different perspectives and there's a lot of different kind of characters in the story, right? But yeah, we want to protect the visitor to the website, because by going to a given website, I have a certain amount of risk that I'm exposed to because the company running that website made decisions about how it runs. And so there is precedent saying both the regulatory stuff as well as some legal precedent. There's a kind of, it's a little bit strange, but somebody's decided to sue Intel in Florida in a class action for doing this kind of exposure that I'm discussing. So there is both a legal and kind of a moral responsibility, and not to moralize, but in my opinion, for anybody who's providing a web service in terms of a customer-facing website, to keep this stuff under control.
So you mentioned sandboxing as an enforcement action. What are some of the other enforcement actions that the product allows the users/admins to take to prevent any malicious behavior, any malicious activity, and attacks from propagating?
Sure, of course. So the sandboxing is kind of the mechanism by which other enforcement is possible. So the enforcement then becomes some tools, some third-party integrations are allowed to modify a web page, some aren't, and in very specific ways, so you can keep the functionality they're supposed to offer in place and still be, you could theoretically run a known compromised service in our sandboxing technology and it wouldn't be able to do anything bad. The other enforcement mechanisms, like I said, is that data control kind of, that functionality, meaning there's a very clean way to expose only what you want to those, let's just call them marketers in this case. I mean, I've spoken to folks who say, let's say I'm filling out an application for a car loan, and there's a lot of really sensitive information on that, right? Probably my social security number and other things. But let's say that I'm filling that out and the company that's going to provide me with the loan, they see they have a marketer who wants to know my income. And they feel that they can expose just that income, if it's anonymized and there's nothing else going on to it, to the marketer. So what our solution would let that auto loan provider do is expose just that information and not everything, which is in fact what the marketer has by default today. If they were installed, everybody who runs JavaScript in the browser is swimming in the same pool, so to speak. So the enforcement is that dual thing of making sure the actions are appropriate for the application and making sure that the data hygiene is in place. There's more to it, but I think it's a good way to sum it up.
Great, thank you.
And looking at some of these attacks, we were talking about third parties that load JavaScript in. Like, give us an idea of just a modern website, like how much JavaScript is in there, and then third parties have third parties potentially, right? And on. Like I don't know if you've ever gone to like a popular media website or anything like that and opened up developer tools. Or use something like a plugin like NoScript. It's a little shocking how many people have stuff stuffed in there. So I guess give us an idea of just kind of the breadth of this issue on a modern website.
Yeah, and that's interesting. So I would be remiss to say what the average website is, but I could tell you, and I'll say more about it in a second, but I could tell you that the sites I was looking at this morning as I was discussing this with different folks, our own website, for instance, has 5 megabytes of uncompressed JavaScript that ends up in a web browser to do stuff when you're on our website. And ours is, you're not logging in there and it's not Office 365. It's a modern website, but the interactivity is light. And that is not at all atypical. Something we were talking about in a different context was, how complex a modern e-commerce website is. And Office 365, if you think about it, you can run Microsoft Word in a web browser now. And I don't think folks really make that connection necessarily, that the front end of a modern e-commerce website, it may not look like it, but the functionality that's in there and kind of whirring away behind the scenes is probably it's at least in the same order of complexity as something like a Microsoft Word, except the functionality is mainly buried from the end user. We just published a state of the industry report, which you could grab on sourcedefense.com if you're interested. But essentially, it's a survey of, I think it's the top 4,500 websites, according to probably SimilarWeb or something similar, that goes over those kind of statistics. And yeah, it's somewhere around 10 integrations, maybe 15. For an average website. It varies by industry. If you look at something like, let's say, Major League Baseball, MLB.com, those are some of the most heavily integrated web apps I've ever seen. They have like 80 to 120 different pieces of technology from outside vendors on every single page load. A zero on that list would be somebody wrote an internal, not on the internet, payroll application that lets people punch a time card. Those usually don't have any integrations, but it varies by industry. And the second thing that you mentioned, Adrian, is that, JavaScript loads other JavaScript, right? And we sometimes hear this about like node package management and software development, more that side of a software supply chain concern, but that happens in the browser too. And it's not just kind of libraries that I might use as a web developer to not reinvent the wheel. It's more like, I'm, Nike, I integrate an advertising partner on my website. That's JavaScript. The advertising partner in real time auctions off that space to a ad content provider. That ad is JavaScript. And then maybe the ad loads its own analytics tool, its own copy of Google Analytics to analyze the performance of the ad, who hovered over the face of the monkey or the golden coin or whatever. That is another JavaScript really application. And that's a fifth party, if you're following along, third, fourth, fifth party relationship that's chained into the browser at the time the page is rendered. So the attack surface, if you will, is very broad. If you look at that MLB example, 80 to 120 things, and very deep as those third, fourth, fifth party relationships start to unfurl.
Yeah, and I think when we were preparing for this, we talked a little bit about, maybe some standards, some actual regulation, legislation coming in here around controlling JavaScript. Could you say a few words about that, about what's going on there?
Sure. Yeah, of course. So I've seen, over my tenure here at Source Defense and over being on the web, the regulations always catching up to the technology. But you saw, I want to say roughly 2017, 2018, that was the first GDPR fine was levied against British Airways for a client-side attack. That was $235 million. So there was precedent now for basically both the attack scenario and the data management scenario under GDPR. You have to enforce both of those specifically in a web browser. And right now that means JavaScript, like you pointed out, Adrian. In the US, we've seen it under CCPA, the California Consumer Privacy Act. New York Shield includes provisions that meet this. About half a dozen, maybe 6 to 10 other state legislatures have moved forward on it. There's an interesting, this is a legal action. It's not legislation, but here I'm in Connecticut. There is a class action going on against a retail bank called Ally Bank. And what happened with them is they just installed an analytics tool on the kind of the login page of their banking app. It wasn't compromised, it just existed there. And because of that access that the marketing tool, the analytics tool had, the bank, it was subject to a breach notification and remediation and now a class action. I'm not sure what will happen with that. But the other thing beyond legislation and legal enforcement is industry regulation. So just this past March, the payment card industry data security standard was updated to 4.0, and there now are specific provisions in there. I think it's 6.4.3 and 11.6 that speak like specifically the words JavaScript are now in PCI DSS, saying you have to inventory these, control them, and make sure they have their their integrity is maintained as long as they're installed where payment card data is installed. So if I were to forecast a little bit, I'd say, 5 to 10 years, this will be in the same place that like those cookie notifications are, where not only are you going to be saying, you as a website owner, not only are you going to be saying to your visitors, hey, we're integrating these technologies, but you're also going to have to integrate a security technology to manage those other integrations. So that's the state of play right now, as far as regulation and et cetera.
Right. Yeah. And as everything moves to SaaS and browser based, it makes a lot of sense for more focus to be there. Definitely. And finally, how would people use your product? How would they deploy your product? What is the, I guess, time to value, the process and the timeline to integrating this into an application? Do you have to custom configure it for each application, or how does all that work?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's really lightweight. Being, we're in a pretty new product category here at Source Defense. I can't really, even though I want to solve problems, I can't really go to folks and say, hey, here's a new solution and I need 2 full-time employees to manage it. So we've engineered it to be as low touch as possible. One of the cool things about being in the client side is we can do a lot of this work before we even get to production, right? All this stuff happens in browsers, so we can configure up front. The other thing is that we're concerned about these third-party integrations as well as the native front-end code in the web app. So what I mean by that is, because we're doing billions of page views a year, we already know, I would say with some confidence, about basically every third-party vendor out there. So we already have rules ready to go. I've seen us deploy as quickly as 48 hours. That was an exceptional circumstance, but it's really simple. It's a couple lines of HTML, and then you're up and running. So that's one of the things. I've been at other places. I've been with products where you're dealing with 20-page statements of work, if not way more, and a lot of scoping and a lot of difficult back and forth, and that's just not the case here. We are pretty plug and play, I guess, to use a really old cliche.
Yeah. No, good stuff. It's it makes sense. Those 2 lines of HTML load your own JavaScript, correct? I would assume.
That's the case. Yeah. It'd be pretty slick if it was just 2 lines of plain text HTML, but even our engineers aren't that good. It loads some JavaScript. We take advantage of certain technical parts of how the browser executes JavaScript, and then basically use that to control what other stuff does and impose some security where none really existed.
Awesome. Matt, thank you so much for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today.
Thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed it, and I hope your audience does as well.
All right. Make sure you visit securityweekly.com/source defense to learn more. We've got the link to that report that Matt mentioned, and link to the company's website. And they have a really good explainer, like a less than 5-minute explainer on there that I watched, and I thought did a really good job of putting it all together. But stay tuned. When we come back, we're going to talk rolling out MFA to all of Salesforce customers with Ian Glazer. CyberArk is at the forefront of demonstrating how identity security can help prevent and block a ransomware infection before it brings a business down. CyberArk offers protection along every aspect of the attack chain, from the initial intrusion all the way through data exfiltration. Whether you are proactively building your security program or need to restore trust in your IT environment, CyberArk has the experience to help. Learn how at securityweekly.com/CyberArk.
Picture your team being able to map out the external attack surface as it grows and see the same attack vectors as a hacker does. Most tools out there do asset discovery, but stop there. Enter Detectify. It takes an inventory of exposed web assets and automates vulnerability testing for security misconfigurations, expiring subdomains, and risks in third-party software. Here's the cool part. They crowdsource payloads from leading ethical hackers. It finds bugs you actually want to fix and finds them in time. Start a free 2-week trial by visiting securityweekly.com/Detectify. Go hack yourself. Attacks can't be prevented, but they can be stopped. Modern cyber attackers have already made it inside your network, but you have the upper hand. Find and eradicate threats with ExtraHop network detection and response, and shut them out before real damage is done. Learn the advanced techniques attackers are using and how ExtraHop stops them with a live attack simulation. Register at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. That's extra HOP.
Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, our Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms. All right, and today, for our second interview, Ian Glazer joins us today to talk about Salesforce's journey towards complete customer MFA. We actually talked about this story during one of our news segments back when there was some press on it, because it was a pretty big deal for a big enterprise SaaS operation to enforce MFA across all customers, or at least we felt like it was. So we discussed it back then. So it's great to have Ian here today. He's the Senior VP for Identity Product Management at Salesforce. He leads the product management team, product strategy, and the identity standards work there. He's also the co-founder of ID Pro, which I wasn't aware of before researching for this interview, not to be confused with IDA Pro, which is a membership organization that provides training, certifications, and other services around identity stuff. He's also a noted blogger, speaker, and SOC photographer. Welcome to the show, Ian.
This is the danger when you don't, fully get all the way to the bottom of the bio. You submit these things for like speaking gigs and they're like, wait, what? I just slid that sentence in there. I take pictures of my socks. It's a long story.
I look for the canaries in the bios. I look, sometimes I go outside the bios and I do my own research.
There you go.
So if I'm interviewing you, you never know. I'll dig stuff up.
Well, it's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to talk about this.
Yeah, and actually, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention how I found you, which was looking through the roster of talks at Identiverse. I picked out some of the ones that looked the most interesting to me, and this was one of them. So I believe you're speaking about this at Identiverse that's mid-June. Is that correct? June, like 22nd through 24th, something like that?
That sounds about right.
And this is more or less the name of the talk, right? What we're talking about today. It's about that journey.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to be talking about some of the things that me and my team learned as we progressed along this path towards rolling out customer MFA. And because there's a lot of things that, whether you are also a SaaS provider and want to do this, or you're just an identity practitioner in your own enterprise and you've got the big thing, whether it's a governance rollout or it's an MFA rollout or an SSO rollout, I think there's things that we learn in the process that everyone can take from. And so I wanted to share some of our experiences.
Yeah. And, rolling out MFA across a large enterprise is one thing, but rolling it out across an enterprise SaaS the size of Salesforce, like I'm not sure I even have a good handle on how big Salesforce's customer base is. Can you give me some idea of just the size of this task?
Sure. So you're absolutely right. Like enterprise rollout of MFA is kind of akin to changing a menu item in the cafeteria, right? Like you can do that and that's going to be fine. You want to go do this for your customer base, that's a whole different ballgame. So we have over 150,000 customers. And so many of them have multiple tenants with us. So that meant rolling this out across all of our lines of business, what we call clouds, about 10 of them. All of the tenants, all of the users that are logging in and interacting with the applications. And that's a hefty undertaking, especially because not all of our clouds had the same MFA capabilities to begin with. So the early part of our program was really about coming up with feature parity. That meant deploying a shared service that they could all use. And then was about rolling out the adoption of MFA to customers, both sort of proactively saying, hey, look, by February 1, 2022, you're going to be contractually obligated to use MFA under these conditions. And then starting to roll out more and more automated enforcement. And that's really where we sit today, but I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself.
So I have a follow-up question. It's one thing, as Adrian hinted at, to roll out MFA, 2FA, whatever we want to call it, at an enterprise for an enterprise-wide company, even for like a massively huge project internal for an internal enterprise. There's somewhat less risk than rolling it out as a vendor. And what I mean by that is if you screw it up as an enterprise, you can mandate your employees use it. They can push back all they want. You can say, tough, you're using it. If you're mandated as a vendor to your customers, they can always say, hey, we're just not going to use you anymore. We're going to go to a competitor. We're going to do something different because the friction's too high, or whatever garbage excuse that we all know is a bad excuse. But I'm sure you ran into those. My two questions are, did you see a lot of resistance from an excuse perspective, number one? And number two is, how did you get it past this top senior executive team to take that added vendor risk of potentially losing revenue?
So let me answer those in reverse order. This mandate, this rollout of MFA started from the top. Our CISO, in conjunction with our two CEOs, our co-CEOs, really said, we're going to do this. And essentially, they likened it to saying, look, it's time for everybody to put on their seatbelts, right? Putting on your seatbelt in a car, it's not something we argue about. You do that. And our co-CEOs are willing to say publicly, hey, it's time for everyone to put on their seatbelts. So we had that strong tone at the top and that support to say, this is the right thing to do because there are things that any vendor can do, Salesforce can do to protect its customers. And there are things that uniquely customers can do to protect themselves. Adoption of MFA is an unusual one in that it's one where it's shared, right? We provide those capabilities, customer needs to adopt those things, and it's actually the best shared way that we collectively can protect our customers and their customers' data. And so that was the thought process, and it came really from the top. Now, the resistance part of it, I'll tell you that we had the opposite in a lot of cases. We had CISOs coming to us and being like, oh, thank God, you gave me an excuse to go bigger with MFA. And I've been wanting to do it, but I hadn't found the vehicle to doing it. And so I could actually use your mandate, your requirement of using MFA to start rolling MFA out internally in the enterprise to more places. Now, let me be clear. We definitely hit use cases that were more difficult than others. A good example is UX test suites and robotic process automation. From our perspective, those just look like good old UX logins, right? Those are normal users from pretty much all perspectives. They were still subject to the MFA requirement. And this is a place where we had to look at those use cases. We had to look at what was viable in terms of like what was technically possible. In some cases, we've given people extensions. In some cases, we've said, look, there are certain use cases that are really, really challenging because there is no technology, whether we possess it or someone else, that's going to meet the need. We'll keep looking. In the meantime, here's other things we suggest you do to protect this specific account in this specific use case. And I think this just comes from a willingness to meet the customers where they are with some empathy of, hey, look, for the vast majority of cases, we can do this. May not be the first thing that was on your mind when you started this program, but you can do it and you should. And then there are going to be those tough use cases and we'll work together with you on them.
So you said it came from the top, the mandate to do this. Do you have a good sense for why that was? What the reasoning was?
I don't know all the specifics. I wasn't in the room when it happened, but I do know that we had been seeing, and we're not unique in this regard, such an increase in credential stuffing attacks, in seeing the kinds of incidents where a second factor in MFA would have prevented an incident. And we're saying, we're looking across us, we're looking at across the whole industry. We're saying, like, look, this is in some sense, from a security perspective, a low-hanging fruit, right? This is the simplest control that can be deployed that has the most impact. Let's push for it. So I think it was really a combination of those factors that we looked at and said, now's the time to do it.
Yeah, and now, really getting to how you would do it, because Salesforce has had MFA for a long, long time. Yep. So was this more the logistics of how to roll it out to customers and enforce it, or was there a bunch of work that you had to do to kind of enhance and improve the actual MFA feature set, to make it robust enough for to answer address all the nooks and crannies of how people would want to do it? Because I imagine some folks were doing it just via SAML, via SSO already, using a different, identity provider like an Okta or something like that, right?
It's a little of both, actually. Partially, it had to do with our different business units, our clouds. Not all of the clouds had the same MFA capabilities. Now, this is natural in an organization that's grown through acquisition as well as sort of organic growth. So we had an uneven feature playing field. We knew we needed to level that, if only because we wanted to offer as consistent guidance to our customers as possible and try to cut down on if you use this product, then on Tuesdays it works like this, and then this product works like this on Wednesdays, right? So we wanted to eliminate that and make it as clear as possible. So there was a part of this effort that was consolidating our clouds onto a single MFA service that we were building, that we had built. The other part of this was, as you say, expanding our feature set. So the big thing that we wanted to make sure we were going to put in the hands of our customers was as many authentication modalities as was practical. We had made some decisions that email OTP, SMS OTP were not going to be allowed. That met with a strong set of opinions from some people. But we said, look, things like TOTP, push-based mobile app, and then the big one was adding WebAuthn. Both the platform support and the hardware key, the roaming support, were really things that we wanted to up-level, give people more choice in what they were doing. So it was a little of both to do this. But to your point, we had a lot of customers who were authenticating to Salesforce, and they were doing SSO. And the requirement is also, when they do SSO, they need to do MFA along with it. And we had conversations with our customers about that. So we did some things to add monitoring there. In the standards like SAML, you can actually see, assuming the IDP sends it, what happened upstream. How did that user authenticate? Same thing with OpenID Connect. So we've been adding tooling around that as well. So a mix of feature parity, new features, and then wanting to really push this out to customers to give them the most kinds of choice in terms of how they can meet the requirements.
And now, so when did all this start? Give me an idea of the timeline. Like how long does it take to take, something like Salesforce, from execs saying, hey, let's go ahead and rip this Band-Aid off and just get this done, to actually getting most of customers, let's say, moved over? Yeah.
So the precursor kind of is the spring, summer of 2019. The program really kicked off in the fall of 2019. Our first customer communications about the deadlines were in April of 2020. The only reason why I know these dates is because on my other window, I'm literally working on my keynotes. I'm like, when did I do that? I had to go back and check. So those are fresh in my head. We set a date of February 1, 2022 for the mandate to take effect. Essentially, on that day, our customers are contractually obligated to use MFA or SSO with MFA. What's happened between that sort of fall 19 and now has been, as I mentioned, some of it is customer adoption, internal customer, right? Getting service parity. And the rest has been focused on awareness, outreach, materials to guide people on how to enable it for their products. And where we find ourselves today is we're doing really well. Do we have 100%? No, we don't. But that's okay. We have an amazing growth on this and have been really driving towards seeing that complete customer adoption. What we noticed, however, is we've got over 150,000 customers, and we actually did call downs. We called admins. We tried to reach them where they were. But we do have a long tail of customers that haven't taken all the steps they need to enable MFA. And what we're doing now is adding more automation to start turning this on more proactively. So up until roughly February this year, it's been a customer has chosen, I'm going to turn this on, or I'm going to turn on SSO. And now what you'll be seeing from Salesforce for this year going forward is more automation, saying, okay, net new tenants, for example, are going to have MFA on by default, unless you're doing SSO, and you can't turn that off. And you'll start to see that across more and more of our products as the year continues.
So a few follow-up questions there. First of all, what were the customer reactions like, when you made this decision? Like, I imagine in some organizations, trying to, like what Tyler was talking about, trying to get, and you as well, for folks waving the MFA banner, not getting support from higher up. I imagine at least some of your customers, that this was great news for them because they don't have to fight that fight anymore. They can just point to Salesforce and say, look, it's mandated now. We got to do it.
So they do that, right? I think overwhelmingly what we hear from our customers is they want to keep their customer data safe, right? And they're willing to do more to do that. So overall, we found people were very, very positive about this. We also got a lot of people saying like, hey, welcome to the party. We've already been doing it. Great. Excellent. And then there was a group of folks, I would say, who said, I want to do this. I see how this is going to be powerful and helpful for me to protect myself and my customers. But I either have a particular use case or I have interesting constraints because of policy that may make this challenging. Can you meet me where I am? Can you help me through this process? So we absolutely had those two, and we worked with them in some cases on a very individual level to help them through that process. But it comes back to, for me, that shared acknowledgement that, hey, customer, we're in the rowboat together here, right? And it's small, and we're trying to protect your customers' data and your data. And some things we can do ourselves, some things you can do yourself, and there's some things that are in the middle that are shared. And this is one of them. And that message really resonated with them.
And one of my follow-up questions was, how do you mandate this if you can't? Well, I guess the better question is, can you see if somebody's upstream using MFA? I would assume you can't. Like with SAML v2, you just assign a different authentication provider, and you can't necessarily see if they've got MFA enabled at that level, right? Like you just have to trust that the customer's doing the right thing there.
It's a combination. You can. In the standards themselves, in SAML, you have something called the auth context. In OpenID Connect, you have something called AMR claims that should give you a window into what's happening upstream. How did that user authenticate at the IDP? What we are seeing is that data is not consistently populated. So whether it's there or not is not consistent. And the values that we get there, although they are, in the case of, let's say, OpenID Connect, laid out in the standard, how they're used and they're meeting the semantics around them, well, that there's no interpreting. So we'll get, and I'll talk a little bit about this in the talk in a couple of weeks, we'll get these strings of abbreviations of like PWD, okay, I assume that was a password, comma, OTP. I'm like, okay, so does that mean that they got a password challenge and a one-time password challenge? Okay, cool. But then we see a lot of random things which are a little less decipherable. So this isn't the sexy part of standards by any stretch of the imagination, but this is one of those things that large IDPs and IDP vendors and ID provider vendors, it would be great if they started making this a default configuration, right? Starting to send that signal is really powerful. So we are asking our customers, this is what it means, and we expect that you're doing it. We know that people's IDP deployments don't necessarily provide that information. So it makes the trust and verify model a little bit challenging. But this is where I think the industry can actually rise up and help all of us, is just provide that signal more in a default manner and standardize the way in the semantics we express what happened upstream.
So it seems like some improvements could make it more automatic and less of like an honor system. It sounds like it's a bit of an honor system type of situation today.
The way I want to start is this. I want the visibility upstream first, right? Because I just want to know, roughly speaking, across the customer base, like, what do we see percentage-wise, right? Is it vast majority of people who are using SSO? Do we have a value or not? Then we can start to be a little bit more detailed about what actions we want to take. What I don't want to do, what I'll be extremely hesitant to do, is turn on any form of automated enforcement if we don't find values, because we know the IDPs aren't sending this information. So there still is a component that we're saying, customer, you're obligated to do this. We don't see that information for right now. We're trusting that you're doing it, but you are obligated to do it. And then over time, we will add more and more automation to it. And if I can poke and prod some of my peers in other places to help by default provide this information, we're going to do that too.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Ian. Thanks for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a blast.
And Ian's talk will be at Identiverse, which is in Denver, Colorado. I was close when I was trying to remember the dates off the top of my head. It is June 21st through 24th in Denver, Colorado. Early rates now available. The website says, and his talk is on Tuesday, June 21st at 3 p.m. Mountain Time. All right. And stick around with us. We'll be right back in a few moments with the weekly enterprise news. Can your incident response technology collect from off-network endpoints? Xterra FTK Enterprise can. Endpoints are no longer located in a physical office, and organizations need a comprehensive investigation tool that enables holistic data collection and review. With FTK Enterprise, you can also scan for IOCs and MISP indicators. You can scan with Yara rules, and you can use integrations to trigger automatic endpoint collections. Visit securityweekly.com/Xterra for access to their white paper, Incident Response for a Remote World.
Attackers are only getting more proficient, so how can you proactively adapt your cybersecurity strategy? Core Security by Help Systems helps you uncover and prioritize the risks that pose the biggest threat to your organization. Core Impact is a penetration testing tool that safely finds and exploits vulnerabilities using the same techniques as attackers. You can conduct advanced pen tests with ease using certified exploits and automations. Take your engagements to the next level by pairing with Cobalt Strike, a threat emulation tool ideal for adversary simulations and red team operations. Learn more at securityweekly.com/core security.
Deepwatch helps secure the digital economy by protecting and defending enterprise networks everywhere, every day. Deepwatch leverages its highly automated cloud-based SOC platform backed by a world-class team of experts who monitor, detect, and respond to threats on customers' digital assets 24/7, 365. Many of the world's leading brands rely on Deepwatch's managed detection and response. Visit securityweekly.com/Deepwatch to learn more. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Do you have a specific guest or topic that we never talk about and you want us to talk about? You can submit suggestions to us. Go to securityweekly.com/guests and complete the form there. We review these suggestions monthly and we'll reach out to you once reviewed. Join us on June 29th for a webcast with Tyler Robinson and Bo Bullock to learn how to pivot into the world of crypto security. Always a blast to, I don't know Bo, but I know Tyler, and we've had a lot of good conversations on crypto. So if you're interested in that, absolutely check out that webcast. You only need your name and email to register. And don't forget to check out our library of on-demand webcasts and technical trainings at securityweekly.com/on-demand. And now for the Enterprise Security Weekly News. You can check out securityweekly.com/ESW276 if you want to follow along as we go through the different news items. Tyler, were you trying to say something?
Nope, I didn't have anything really to bring up today. Just saying hello.
Don't do that to me. Oh my goodness.
This is the way I'm going to do it right now. I can't do it and talk in the mic at the same. I can't do it and talk in the mic at the same time. But this is the way I'm going to do the rest of this segment.
Yeah, there's a definite visual gag here. If you're listening to an audio only version of this.
Oh yeah.
I'll leave it.
I forgot we do audio podcasts too. That was kind of stupid, but hey.
No. It's. I think it's fun because maybe somebody checked out your first couple minutes of the news segment just to see what we're doing, what silly stuff
Absolutely.
we're doing. Yeah. So where I want to start out is actually not with one of the stories, but to you, Tyler and Katie, because you're both in the marketing side of things. This is our first RSA, our first conference season back from the pandemic. So not just RSA. I mean, we're so back that we've got two major conferences going on in the same week, and everybody is sort of fine with it. So, what kind of stuff are we going to see over the next couple of weeks? Black Hat, RSA, Gartner's conference. We've got pretty much one of everything happening over the next 6 weeks here. Are we going to see a ton of new announcements here, new products? What should we be looking out for?
Absolutely, 100%. You're going to see a flood of announcements, a flood of fundings, a flood of fundings that have maybe closed in the last 6 months get announced. You'll see announcements around new product lines, new feature sets, new partnerships. All sorts of things will be coming out now. What's interesting is, as a vendor in creating and actually trying to support these different events, there's really only going to be a couple of them that knock it out of the park, because it works better when they're spread out throughout the year. People don't want to do 5 boondoggles in 6 weeks, right? They just don't want to. So there's no way that we're going to see all of these 5-6 events, whatever it is, in these 6 weeks hit their expected numbers. I think RSA we'll see do very, very well because it's the big one. It's the premier one. It's the one that everybody's going to want to go to. I think on the other end of that bookend, Black Hat in August is still far enough apart from RSA that you might get a 1-2 punch of people going to both boondoggles this summer. But I think you'll see things like Cisco Conf and Splunk Conf, which are both in the second week of June, have lower turnouts than normal. I think you'll see Gartner's event will be lower turnout because it's over the top of RSA. And there's just too much. It's just too packed in. And, even as vendors, we can't even do them all, right? Because I can't put 2 booths in 2 different locations when I only own one physical 20 by 20 booth. So, I think in a general sense, you'll see some of them do well, some of them fall flat as we kind of get through this rush of unlocking that's occurring in the summer. And then hopefully the second half of this year into Q4, we'll start to see them stretch back out into a normal pace next year. Katie, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I agree with everything you said, but 2 things to add on to that. I think there's going to be, on the one hand, we're going to see incredible creativity or stretching the limits of creativity at certain booths, especially the larger booths at RSA, what companies want to do, making the biggest splash they can. Some of them will be huge and amazing. Some of them will be huge and will fall flat. But I think there's going to be incredible innovation because there's been bottled up anticipation. On the other hand, companies are going to try to get the most coverage they can because they've been so thirsty. The salespeople in particular have been so thirsty for in-person events that these companies aren't going to have enough bandwidth to do all of the creative things that they want, even if it's something simple like not having the actual physical booth to do it. Exactly. They're not going to have some of the bandwidth, the money, the staff, the whatever to do what they want to do. So there might be some streamlining or continuity or duplication between their events. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens there. This summer is going to be jam-packed. I think people are genuinely excited to get back to events. But I think once we're past this summer, there are going to be a lot of people who are going to say, all right, we did that. We hit this really, really hard first time since 2019 or very, very, very beginning of 2020. I kind of like not going to an event every 3 to 4 weeks. So I think the summer is going to be nuts. I think people are going to be all excited, but I think we're going to see an industry shift a little bit in 2H and beyond because people will be excited and then they'll realize, it was kind of nice to be home. It was kind of nice to have my routine. Hey, we've figured out ways to do virtual events. Let's do more mixing and matching between in-person and virtual than, those every other week trips to here, there, and everywhere. Unless you're a diehard salesperson. I think that those folks will probably still enjoy the consistent travel. But I think there will be a lot of people who are like, I need to get back to my desk a little bit more, and I want to get back to my daily routine a little bit more.
And speaking of having a lot to unpack, congratulations are in order because Jupiter 1 is, as of today's announcement, a cybersecurity unicorn. So congratulations, Tyler.
Thank you. We've been at it for a while now. The growth rate's astronomical. We feel like we're in a very good place, and we took the money in, and we're going to apply it to continuing to grow the company at a nice, healthy, maintainable clip for the business over the next handful of years as we continue to get successful with Jupiter 1. So we're really excited. Today was a big day for us.
The reason you're a CMO is because of the inserting of the word astronomical while talking about your funding and
yes. Yes, that's exactly why I'm.
Yeah, no, this is great. I think it's great for you. I think it's great for the industry. Talk a little bit about, why these investors, what are some of the things you're going to do? I know it's listed a little bit in the press release, but talk about the planned growth here, because it's really exciting.
Yeah, no, we had follow on from our current investors. Our new lead is Tribe Capital, Sri Pangular from Tribe Capital, who is a phenomenal partner for us. For those that don't have the visual feed, there is a unicorn with my face that has been photoshopped onto it on the screen now. So we have 3 Tyler faces on the screen right now, which is kind of scary. Sri and the team at Tribe led the round. We also announced additional investment from Intel Capital, among other players, and so we are going to continue to grow this company in the nice, healthy way that we're doing it. Right, we're seeing fantastic growth quarter over quarter, year over year, and we'll continue to achieve that growth. But we're not going to get ourselves too far out over our skis. We're not going to get ourselves into overhiring, overgrowth, like we see a lot of overfunded unicorns in the last couple of years. And so, yeah, we're excited to apply this at both GTM, go-to-market growth, as well as product speed growth and velocity of development and innovation.
This gets us off Jupiter One a little bit, but it's interesting. It's a 70 million Series C, which is obviously a good amount, but very modest compared to what we've been seeing. And, some are going to say, wait, you could have gotten more. Why didn't you get more? And then there are others who, and I'm in this camp, who are saying, good for you. Don't take more than you need. Grow modestly. Use what you need to grow, but don't outprice yourself, whether you go IPO, whether you go acquisition, because we are seeing a little bit of a shift, I think, in the market. The M&A markets right now are all topsy-turvy, sign of things to come. But I think it was smart, but there'll be some who say, what? You could have gotten 170 million Series C. Sure.
That's exactly why I'm using the healthy term in the statements that I'm using, right? At the end of the day, it's about building this business to last and building this business to continue to grow in a nice, predictable, healthy manner. And we feel like we're going to achieve that this year. We're going to achieve, very significant growth this year, both in headcount and in revenue. And I think by the end of the year, we'll feel like we're in a really good place. And yeah, it's just about taking the right amount at the right time, at the right valuation, and then creating a business model that demonstrates that you can track the business to, cash flow positive in the appropriate amount of time, but grow the business while maximizing that growth without putting yourself in danger or at risk as a business. And that's for every company. This isn't just Jupiter One commentary, right? This is for every company that's raising money now. Raise the amount that lets you grow to your maximum speed without putting your business at risk in doing so. And I think that's great advice in today's macroeconomic VC and investment economy.
Yeah, I think, it's a good example for companies because we've seen these insane rounds, we've seen these insane valuations, and we're starting to see the signs that this is going to come back to haunt a lot of companies. And we've already seen it in the past couple of weeks, again, getting us a little off topic here, but a couple of key companies with some major layoffs, and they were following really big raises. And so it's a warning sign, I think, personally, to be very mindful of what you're doing and not just take everything you possibly can. It's not necessarily, you don't get the gold star for raising the most money. You get the gold star for having the best company, the best product, or if this is your goal, to get acquired for a really respectable amount that puts money in your pocket and your employees' pockets, by the way. Or the same with IPO. I don't think you get a gold star for saying, hey, we raised the most.
Yeah, I haven't been on the show for the last few weeks. I've been out recovering. But when I look at what has been happening in the last few weeks, I'm sure you guys even discussed it on the show, but some of these companies, some of these massive high-tech companies taking 50 to 60 to 70% valuation write-downs and markdowns, 40-something million down to 20 million, or 40 billion down to 20 billion valuation, right? And then having to reprice everything. Yeah, it's just not a good place. You don't want to be in that place of overfunding and then saying, "Oh my gosh, it's going to take us 25 years of growth to ever get to this valuation," right? And that's always the tricky thing when raising money. It's about matching the raise amount with the valuation amount, with the ability to grow and grow at the maximum capacity without adding too much risk.
Yeah, and they were saying, Katie, on that clip that you shared in the ESW channel, and they've been saying it on the All In podcast as well, that looking at using public SaaS company comps, the multiples are effectively, I think the average is 5.6 times revenue. Mm-hmm. And like the top 30 most exceptional SaaS businesses are doing 8.5x. Right. So nothing near like the 20 to 100x that, you see some valuations leaning
What
on.
I will tell you, though, Adrian, is it's a balance. That valuation is a balance against revenue plus using growth percentage as some kind of multiplier to get to that valuation. Most of those public comps are growing in the 20, 30, 40% range. So you see the squish down that occurred because they were being valued as a 200% year over year grower. And it just didn't make any logical sense. When you get down and you take those comps down into the VC investment world, it is a little bit different. I wouldn't expect a comp to be around 5x forward looking. More reasonable is somewhere in the 15 to 30x forward looking, but it's all dependent on the growth percentage year over year. If you're growing 300% year over year for 3 years straight and you're sitting on 20 or 30 million in ARR, you're going to have a much higher valuation than if you're only growing 10%, right? So there's a lot of variables that go into that multiple. But, I think for most of the early stage VC style investable companies, the earlier you get, the higher that multiple is going to be. The later, the closer you are to a direct comp to public.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I love the early stage. They're like, we had 1,000% growth. Yeah. Like, what was your revenue last year? 30 grand?
Yeah, 30 grand, exactly.
It happens. Yeah. It's very exciting. Sure. It makes for a great press release, but yeah, of course, at the early stages, you're going to go from 0 to 60 or 0 to 3,000 really quickly. But once you start getting up into those higher revenue levels, you can't expect the same growth anyway. So the longer you've been around, and you would think the longer you've been around, the later the funding you're raising, the C's, D's, E's, and, some companies may do more than that. Obviously, the revenue is going to be higher. It gets a little harder if you've been around 8 years or 10 years or 20 years to say, hey, I'm going to grow 3,000% unless you do something absolutely crazy. But I can't think right now of any examples of that happening without a serious merger.
Yeah, so I can't, so moving on to the funding announcements here, last week we only had 5 and they were tiny, like we barely had 50 million in funding to talk about last week. And I was wondering, like, I didn't think we'd be seeing the impact of any market downturns at that point in funding. And I suggested that maybe it's because everybody's holding out to release their announcement within a week of RSA. And sure enough, we've got 16 announcements here today. So it's
sure. Historically, it's RSA has been the funding announcement, and Black Hat has been the product announcement venue. So this makes sense, and in an attempt to differentiate these two massive conferences, which are a couple of weeks apart, I would think that this makes sense to try to get the money out and then all the big product hoopla out in August.
Yeah, and I don't think you'd want to announce the week of. Most folks I've talked to aim to announce the week before, because week of, everybody's so busy, nobody's going to see it.
Adrian, there's a game there. There's a game there, right? Like some people will announce Tuesday of RSA and try to catch in the moment press. Most people, like we obviously just did at Jupiter One, we announced the Thursday before the event. And I think you see a lot coming out the week before. And some people even try to scoop you. You might have seen some Tuesday, Wednesday this week trying to scoop the Thursday teams like us. So It's just a game everybody plays.
Yep.
Yeah, don't do it next week. I had this conversation with somebody. You're going to get so buried in the, hey, remember we have this event, and hey, you're signed up to go to this talk, and don't forget our keynotes. I think it's a bad idea to put out any big announcements next week. Just my opinion.
Yeah. Devo is another big one. Announced a $100 million funding round. That is a Series F with a valuation of $2 billion. Also making Devo a cybersecurity unicorn. And not a terribly surprising one. Devo's seems like they've been growing quite a bit. Getting up there is a big, I don't know, maybe a Sumo Logic and Splunk competitor. I think that's really where they've
definitely positioning as a Splunk competitor and a Splunk disruptor. 100 on 2 billion's very healthy raise amount and valuation size. I do have some inside baseball in general about their revenue rates, and it does support those levels of valuations because they are growing like crazy.
And they really, they're a different type of company than a Splunk. They compete on, the indexing issues, which they don't have, which make them faster. That's their claim, and the cost. And Splunk is a fantastic tool. It's great, and they are entrenched, but it's not cheap to run. So here comes along a cloud-native company doing similar types of things for less. So you're going to get those companies who are either just starting up their own SIEM or, want to take things in-house. I think migration could probably be a massive nightmare, but I'm sure they're winning some of those deals too, and just toughing it out until, until the actual migration happens, which is never going to be a snap of your fingers when you're dealing with something as big and complex as SIM. But, good company. Talked to them a couple of years ago and was really impressed. So kudos to them too.
Yeah, and I think some of the trend we're seeing here is, Devo's easier to use too. I must admit, I'm not sure I understand why Splunk architecture gets quite so crazy. Like there were SaaS services back when Splunk came out in the mid 2000s, and like the writing's been on the wall for a while. And then, when Sumo Logic came out, they actually have a free tier that I use. And it's just stupid simple to get stuff up and running in there. And you can run something simple with Splunk, but, once you start scaling up, like the architecture just seems more complex than it needs to be, and it's, I think they do have a SaaS offering now, but it's, feature parity isn't exactly there. So yeah, it's an interesting space because it's, I don't know what the margins are like, but it's almost commoditized at this point. Would you guys agree?
Yeah,
the people
definitely
that
not wrong.
The data, manage the data, report the data.
I mean, think about what they do. They pull in event information, incident information, indicators compromise, all that stuff into a single platform and allow you to look at it, connect it, inventory it, query it, right? All of the things that are happening in real time. And there's a lot of value when you think about the analysis of that data and looking at that data in real time. And they were the first to do it, and they were the most powerful, and that's why they've become what they've become. And I think Devo's taken a cut and trying to steal that away from them with some innovative technologies.
Yeah. I'm not terribly familiar with, this is my number one story, $200 million funding round led by KKR, which I believe is a PE firm. We've seen do some acquisitions and stuff like that as well in the security space. Not too familiar with Semperis. It's apparently an identity vendor, but I don't think this is a VC round, or not a typical VC round.
KKR is private equity.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know much about Semperis, but I do know that kind of that identity-driven cybersecurity play is to me is one area I'm very, very interested in. from a futures perspective, because one of the things that are consistent when we're talking about more modern security models and infrastructures is that you can't do anything without authentication authorization of an identity or a token to make it occur, right? And that's across every service, every product, everything that you do. And if you can track and analyze those pieces of data, you have a very good vantage point into the operational security of what's happening in your environment. And so I do like some of these more modern identity-based cybersecurity, identity threat detection kind of plays. And, with a very brief, and I don't know what Semperis does, I'm not up to speed on them in particular, but just doing a very brief glance at their website, they are using similar terms like identity threat detection, things like that I think are just a really great futuristic market. And so I'm not surprised that they're starting to get, big adoption investments and things like that.
So let me hit you with the tagline on their website, or not tagline, but the short version of what they do. Semperis provides the only 100% automated, AD-aware forest recovery and management technology.
Sounds a little niche to me. If you're just taking that, it sounds very niche of AD-centric.
Maybe a ransomware situation or something like that. I can see it for that. Yeah. I mean, if your AD forest needs recovery, you really need that recovery. I know that.
You'll pay anything for that.
You'll pay anything for that. Absolutely. 100%. Let's see. Going down the list here.
Can I bring up a real quick trend, Adrian?
Yeah.
And just scanning through the links, I've noticed a pretty consistent A round size. I don't know if you've seen that. This kind of new 20, 30, 15 to 30 A round seems to be pretty
coming
consistent.
Down a little bit.
So this next one on the list is 50. This is
50A?
Number 4 is ChainGuard, which is going after secure software supply chain. That's a 50 million Series A.
Well, this one caught my eyes for something totally different. This one caught my eyes because the music band Chainsmokers is invested.
That's a music band? I noticed that.
You don't know who the Chainsmokers are? Come on, man.
What?
Wait a minute. Isn't Apollo Ono one of the investors in the company that just led you around?
Led my round?
Yeah.
No, not that I'm aware of. I've never been told that. No.
But
the Chainsmokers.
I can't remember. I saw that recently. Apollo Ono is an investor now. He was
not
cool.
affiliate.
Maybe not as cool as Chainsmokers. I don't know.
Chainsmokers is cool as hell. So I want Chainsmokers to invest in my company so that I can get them to DJ my parties in Vegas when I do big parties.
I am not familiar. So this is a DJ duo, and I am not familiar with them. And their Wikipedia page does not list their investments. So a little disappointed in that.
Yeah, no, they're definitely the investor because it's the Chainsmokers Mantis VC. Unless it's somebody else who's stealing their name, which I guess is possible.
I don't know. They're listed as in 2017, listed as third on Forbes' world's highest paid. Forbes has a world's highest paid DJs list. First of all, this is a list that Forbes maintains from year to year, and they were third on the list with earnings of 38 million. So they certainly have the money to invest.
Well, doing a little bit of a quick Google foo, at September 15th of 2020, the Chainsmokers closed their debut venture fund, the Mantis VC Fund, with $35 million in their first fund. So yes, the Chainsmokers are investors. They are the world's highest paid DJs, and they got a piece of this company that we're talking about right now.
Wow. Yeah, and that's... And some of the names pinned under there, you got Kathy Wang, who's the CISO at Discord. You've got Nipun Gupta, who's over at Devo, who we were just talking about. Taylor Lehman's over at Google. Omkar also over at Google. Yeah, kind of a who's who on the individual investors. angel investor list here.
Yeah, plus ChainGuard also did their release as an article blog style, which I just love. It's just such a good way of putting it out.
Also, they mention like it's a huge round. It's a $50 million round, and it's almost an afterthought. It's at the very end of the article, which I also like. You don't start out, because almost every other press release you read, the very last article in ChainGuard's post here is usually the first one. First thing you hear is the size of the round, who the lead investor, like all that stuff, all the financial stuff is first. And you're lucky if you can figure out what the company does going through the rest of the press release. But in this case, it's the exact opposite, which I like.
It's a hot area, though. The supply chain, software supply chain security is a very, very booming area. There's a number of companies getting invested in this spot, kind of pressing that SBOM, software bill of materials, forward, finding ways to secure the chain all the way from creation up through use. It's going to be neat to see how this disrupts potentially the traditional application security testing market, the likes of Veracode and WhiteSource, or actually, I don't even know if you guys caught that last week. They changed, WhiteSource changed their company's name to Mend, which was a big thing. But yeah, that whole AST space is being disrupted by this kind of new software supply chain approach.
And it's interesting. One of the things they're doing is something that Docker had their registry. A lot of the I think AWS also has a container registry. So it looks like they're providing base container images as well that aim for zero known vulnerabilities. So ChainGuard images can actually, I guess it's just going to be one of their products is ChainGuard images. Whereas they also have ChainGuard Enforce, which is more the vulnerability visibility piece of it, vulnerability management and visibility. So yeah, ChainGuard images is basically like a container registry that you can use to check out the base images that you use, and then apply whatever you need to those images. Use that to. But
none of that is different than what's already being done at Sonatype and other kind of repository-based security companies. Trying to think of the other. JFrog, right? They're already doing all that kind of stuff. So I'm not sure what the delta is here.
I don't think they provide the actual images, though, do they?
Well, I know Sonatype a few years back was doing security of like if you download images, Docker images and things like that, you can actually store them in a repository, auto scan them, look for software security issues within the images before you push into your Kubernetes cluster and push to production. So I'm sure that has come more forward since I was last intimate with Sonatype a few years back. But my point is all that stuff's already being done. So it's going to be neat to see if these guys can do something truly innovative and disrupt the Sonatypes of the world.
I mean, the hype level is definitely there for it. I forget, it was somewhat notable who the founders were. I can't recall who they are right now, but yeah, I remember that creating a lot of excitement around this company as well. So yeah, eager to see how that goes. All right, let's see. I might skip some of these other. So much fundraising. I think there's a couple interesting, notable ones in here. So number 8 is not a startup funding round. It's a funding round for basically throwing some money at open source projects to improve the security of those open source projects. And it's several large vendors that are pitching in on this. Amazon, Google, Microsoft have committed to this project. The Linux Foundation, Open Source Security Foundation, and so the project looks like they aim to raise $150 million total, and this is just the initial funding. This is $30 million.
Wow. All for open source security. That's another thing I noticed too when I was scanning this week's list of stories is there's actually a number of open source discussion, open source products, open source offerings like this one, companies like Tidelift that are doing open source related security. There's a lot of open source and software supply chain stuff being funded right now across the board.
Yeah,
it's fundamental. Somebody needs to be looking out for it, and open source doesn't just mean free. To certain people, open source just means free, but it's not. And if you don't have anybody looking after it and maintaining it and improving it and going back to it, then we've all seen the problems. So much software. Actually, at the beginning of this article, it says about 97% of software relies on open source software. You can't just ignore it just because it's freely available. Somebody's got to be taking care of it. So kudos to those companies for investing in it. 30 million won't go a huge way considering how much open source software is out there. But if this is just the first round of, 4, 5, 6, good. It will definitely help the supply chain and software security.
I think it can go a long way because, if all that's going directly to providing tooling or support, for open source project maintainers, that goes a lot further than 30 million, to a startup, where a big chunk of that's going to go to sales and marketing, right?
Well, sure. This is for people's time. There's probably not a whole lot of new tools procurement going on, and yeah, they don't need sales and marketing support. They don't need office space. They don't need all of that. But this will add up given how much open source is out there.
Yeah. And then the other interesting one here was my article number 14, which is Forge Point Capital, which is a dedicated VC. They only do early stage cybersecurity investments. And it is a 10 million Series A, but what makes it notable is they also incubated this company, which is something that we've seen like YL Ventures, a few of the other early stage VCs do. And it's always interesting, rather than trying to find somebody who's already started it, a lot of these VCs pour a lot of time and effort into, what they want to fund, so why not, piece it together? I'm kind of curious, Tyler, if you have any opinion on a VC going out and finding founders that have already started a thing versus finding founders and saying, hey, we need somebody to build this in this category. Will you do it?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. It used to be a few years ago, if you got in, let's just call it B+ and later in cyber, you were pretty much guaranteed a return, right? You got in B or later, it was getting bought. It already had product market fit. You were pretty much returned. It got hyper competitive in those stages because the return was a lower risk investment, right? And so it got hyper competitive. And where was the room to go, right? The valuation started skyrocketing in the later rounds, and people said, well, where do I go? Well, you went earlier and earlier. So you started doing Bs, then you started doing As, then you started doing seed. And really, you're just seeing kind of the follow through of taking that to, hey, what if I just start to invest in people that might be the type of people that might be able to build a cyber company? And I think we're getting to the point where that is even becoming saturated, right? With the Y Combinators and the YL Ventures and these guys now. There's a number of them that do this. Another thing that they do is scouting programs, right? So they've got people like me out there scouting and bringing deals to them. So they've really, a lot of these mid-stage VCs have pushed earlier and earlier. Now that's getting competitive and hyper competitive. And so they're doing this kind of seed the ground, right? Put seeds in the ground and hope they grow super early kind of model. I'm not sure it's going to pay off. And the reason why is that is so high risk. Like the risk of actually getting any kind of return on any of those investments is very, very low. But if you hit one and it does real well, you're in so freaking early that you're going to make a killing, right? So that's the risk reward model is definitely there. But the flip side of that coin is, does it make sense for the company? Does it make sense for the people that are building the company to give away so much equity so early? That's also something that I'm not completely convinced on here.
There's another factor that might shift your thinking a little bit. Both the companies that, well, maybe we'll see, but both the companies that ForgePoint Capital has incubated now are services companies, which is
that's very interesting. I didn't know that.
Bakes my noodle a bit. Like, that's not what I would expect to see a VC incubating something to choose. The first one, Soul Cyber, was an MSSP for the mid-market. And then this one, Surefire, is an incident response company.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's super interesting. I did not realize that. I mean, obviously return on them, maybe because they feel that they're going to have a better chance of building a business because it's lower risk in the sense that it's services based, but they do it earlier, lower the risk and get a mid-sized return out of it. Seems like a reasonable model.
Well, lower risk, lower overhead. Also, if we're talking about, the cybersecurity understaffing issue, and I know we're going to get into this later, it's not that there aren't going to be enough people there necessarily. It's going to be that the model shifts even more significantly than it has. It's not just going to be those SMBs who are using outsourced services. We know that enterprises also rely on outsourced services. They just also have a big team internally. And so the model, the economies of scale with a services company are going to fit that niche. And especially as security grows even more, there's going to be even greater need for these types of third-party companies who are partnering with all types of companies up and down from SMB to enterprise.
Yeah, interesting stuff. So yeah, eager to see what happened with both of those. Certainly we've seen the idea of services being like a 2x investment, or a 2x return type of company kind of flipped on its head with like Arctic Wolf, Cyber Unicorn. Mandiant had a very nice exit. Of course, none of these companies do have software as well, proprietary software that they're building, but still at their core services companies. So, I don't know, maybe, and
Bishop
with the market saying if a SaaS vendor is now a 5.x company and Arctic Wolf is an 8x company, like, what the hell is happening?
Yeah, no, Bishop Fox is another good example. I was reading through the ForgePoint stuff. They were invested in Bishop Fox. Bishop Fox started to create their own, I think they're calling it CAST, Cloud Application Security Testing product. It started to get some traction.
Yeah.
And they did an investment there. And yeah, I think you're right. Even if they keep the non-ARR revenue on the books and give them a smaller multiplier on it, if SaaS compresses that far, does it bring the concept of investing into services back into play?
Yeah. All right, let's move on real quick here. Just a short note that the Mimecast, I think we talked about this last December. Mimecast, I assume a PE firm called Permira, was taken in private for $5.8 billion. So that's happened. They're delisted on the NASDAQ. They are now private.
Yeah, here's my prediction, Adrian, for the rest of this year and into next year. Massive M&As. You're going to see fundings stay small in a quantity perspective and massive M&As this year and next year.
Buyer's market?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. And speaking of buyer's markets, ReliaQuest picks up Digital Shadows for $160 million.
Small deal, $160 million all cash deal, I believe it was. Yeah, that's an interesting deal. I think the founders were just done with it. It wasn't growing maybe as fast as they had hoped at this point, and just wanted out of it and go on to their next thing. Because I know it wasn't. I don't know exactly what they took in from an investment standpoint, but it was not a huge multiple on total cash invested.
58.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, a bit surprising to some people there. I think Digital Shadows had a great marketing game, but ultimately the product was fairly niche and small. It's the last time I tested it out last year, and honestly, it was the same with me. I thought the product was much broader than what it was, and and yeah, it's basically data loss detection. Is kind of the core of it. They're calling it digital risk management, I think, which is kind of the same category as Risk IQ, who's kind of moving into the attack surface management category when they get acquired by Microsoft. But but yeah, for the most part, they'll tell you if your employees' credentials are kind of like a "Have I been pwned" or something like that. If any of your data or credentials have been exposed.
Yeah, just by the description alone, it sounds like it needs to be a piece of something bigger.
And it is in other companies. So if you look at Flashpoint, if you look at Recorded Future, if you look at a lot of the other threat intel companies that have turned into kind of roll-ups, this is just one, of many features of their platforms. Yeah. All right. Let's see. So we talked about the market already. So my trends 20 and 21 are both related. 21, I think, Tyler, Katie, you might find interesting. It's basically pulling live data from the public markets from cybersecurity related public companies, and they're doing some analysis on current price versus 52-week high and low. And it's what you'd expect if you read any of this stuff, but yeah, interesting spreadsheet to peruse if you want to.
The key thing I like about this, Adrian, is the brands that they've put in it. Right? They didn't muck it up by calling Microsoft or Google a cyber company and jamming some goofy thing like that in there. This brand list is really good.
Yeah. Yeah. And so there's number 20 is the actual post. Number 21 is the data behind it. Let's see, other trends here. Trellix, which used to be McAfee. And since we're mentioning that Trellix used to be McAfee, there was also a rebrand that I missed, I think from a couple months ago, where the SSE business, which used to be SASE, now it's, I'm having keeping all the acronyms, but they went back and used an old acquisitions brand, Sky High Security, to their SSE business. So they're wanting to ditch McAfee altogether, get rid of it altogether.
Can you blame them? Can you blame them?
No, it was a good opportunity too. I think when John McAfee, kind of popped back into the media limelight, like that was not a great thing for their branding, for their image. So yeah.
No, I can't blame them at all. But it's, what is catching my eye about some of these rebrands though is, this Trellix and going back to Sky High, and I'm not exactly sure what the benefit out of some of them are. Like dumping McAfee, I get, right? That makes total sense. But and I actually have a little bit of investment in this one. But why would WhiteSource change their name to Mend? Like WhiteSource has a ton of brand equity and it's all positive. So I'm not sure exactly why companies do that.
The same reason that we don't use the term whitelist anlistened. We say allow list.
Yes.
Could be.
Yeah. Yeah. So whitelist, blacklist, black is bad, white is good, those kinds of implications that, have really kind of turned people off of using terms that.
I hear you, but that's got to be a tough decision for that business, because 10 years of built up brand equity in the AppSec space is now poofed, and they're now called Mend.
And how like SSO is a tough game when your name is Mend or redacted or no name.
Yep.
I don't even redacted no name are a bit easier than something like Mend. Like there's a company called Circle, that made this proxy you'd put on your home network, and you could use it for parental controls. Like, I could give my kids 30 minutes of internet time, and then it would just cut them off and they'd have to go do chores. And once they did the chore, they got more time. And it was impossible to find them. If you tried to look up Circle, They wouldn't even be on the first page of results. So it was a complete mess. So I agree. It's brands are tough already, but I would rather you just go with some pronounced nonsense name than something that's clever and hard to remember or find.
Absolutely.
So speaking of Trellix, the trend there was they did a survey of 1,000 cybersecurity professionals, which is a decent sample for doing a study. I've done a lot of studies in my past. I don't think I've ever done one with 1,000 or more people. All mine have been under that, and found that 30% are planning to change professions outside of cybersecurity within 2 or more years. Which is interesting, which leads to a whole bunch of questions. Surveys are hard. Data is anecdotal. There are all kinds of, issues with surveys in general. But still, I think this is somewhat notable. Anecdotally, we hear about people leaving this industry. And I wonder what percentage of those 30% are just entering, because we know a lot of people entering aren't doing, like bottom level SOC analyst job, is not something that makes you want to stick around for life in this industry. Right. So I wonder how many of them are just retiring, so that's something that the survey didn't really control for, I don't know how many of these 30% are just hitting 65 or, earlier and retire early or something like that.
Yeah,
so
there are a lot of open questions. A sample size, like you said, 1,000 people, that's great, but where are they in their careers in terms of their tenure? What industries are they in? Are we talking about enterprise security practitioners? Are we talking about vendors? They're very loose with the term security practitioners. So are we talking about strict security roles, or are we talking about people who work at security companies who may be in sales or marketing or what have you? For me, this opened more questions than it answered. And I think this is a little bit of a clickbait headline. I hate to say it, but it seems to me like this was meant to get people to click on it. And there's some competing data in this report versus the other report that's on the list. The other survey said, people find security fulfilling. And in this one here, it said that that people didn't feel much support. It says, as for cybersecurity workers themselves, those who plan on leaving the profession are doing so because they feel underappreciated and unable to grow in their roles. They lack a clear career path, a lack of social recognition, and a limited support to develop their skills. So it's almost contradicting the other report, the previous Trellix report, about.
So they're both the same. So a quick point here. So number 23, the ZDNet article is an article about the Trellix report that comes right.
But some of the data in there, but that gets to your point where, surveys are hard. You can interpret data in a number of ways. And I think some of it verges on contradicting itself. Not that these are put out by the same people, because they're not, but it does make you look at these types of reports and scratch your head a little bit when you can find those discrepancies in, quote, data about the same data, right? So that report, the ZDNet report, was all bad news, but in this original report, it says 92% of cybersecurity professionals agree that cybersecurity is purposeful, soulful work that motivates them. That's in complete contrast to what I just read verbatim from the ZDNet report, claiming to be citing it. Now, I haven't gone in and checked those citations, but ZDNet is certainly a reputable publication, so I'm sure they're not, making data up.
Yeah,
so
no.
that's definitely something you have to keep in mind when, it sort of gets to the idea that a larger philosophical crisis that we have in society with misinformation and disinformation, right? Which one do you read and which one do you believe?
They know it's going to get more clicks, so they're gonna pick and choose from that survey. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Which, anytime I see an article like the ZDNet one, like the whole reason that the original survey blog post is in here is immediately when I read that, I'm like, okay, first of all, let's see if the journalist misinterpreted the survey results, because it's very easy to do based on, and sometimes the survey questions, if they're not put together well, like you'll get misleading answers to those questions in the survey. So immediately I have to go to the survey, and it's a decent blog post. Like, it's not raw data from the survey results, but it shows you the exact wording of the questions, which is really important to have when doing any kind of analysis on a survey.
Right. You definitely have to look at the survey design. I worked at a company for a very short time that wasn't in cybersecurity, and I thought I was okay at writing questions. And then I worked with someone who was a master at it, and just tiny little word tweaks influence outcomes exponentially.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's crazy. But I think, life lesson, not just in security, it's, have a critical eye to what you're reading, because right here we have two examples of reading, quote, about the same thing, end quote, and you're getting two almost opposite perspectives on a few data points. So it's really important to read both of them and use your own analytical skills.
100%, which is why I wanted to get that original blog post in there. They did a good job with that, where it's not, they present the data, you can come to your own conclusions, but didn't try to wrap too much of their own opinions around it. Let's hit the squirrel stories before we close up here. First one here is great. It's a tweet. I don't know Joey Piccola, but he said, I never thought I'd say this, but my window blinds won't open because of an expired certificate. Welcome to the future, folks.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. My washer and dryer just broke, and I had to order a new washer and dryer. And I actually sprung for the one that is internet connected and alerts my phone when, the cycles are done and all that stuff. And now I'm like, oh God, is somebody going to hack my washing machine? Really?
I can't wait for the toilet that won't flush.
Exactly.
Yeah, in contrast, I just had to buy a new microwave, and I went for the opposite. I'm like, I don't need to turn on my microwave remotely. I just don't. I don't need to spend the money. It's ridiculous. I can walk down to my kitchen. If I'm too lazy to walk down to my kitchen to press the button on the device that makes my cooking easier already, I don't deserve a kitchen.
Yeah, I totally agree with that when it comes to a microwave. However, I can't tell you the number of times I've left clothes in the washer and just forgot about them, and for hours on end. So that I think will be useful.
I think you're a squirrel, Tyler. That's the problem.
I'm a squirrel. 100% I'm a squirrel. No doubt.
Preventing mildewed clothes is important.
It is.
Absolutely. And then the last squirrel story here is closer to an actual, it's rodent related. Gene editing experiment turns fluffy hamsters into aggressive mutant rage monsters is the title of this article, and it's not exaggerating much. So
wow.
Basically, they're trying to understand the roles of certain hormones, specifically here it's vasopressin, and they were thinking that blocking it, I think they could increase bonding and cooperation between them, and they specifically chose Syrian hamsters, I think because they're social. Their social organization is similar to humans, but the exact fucking opposite happens. And it's just like this is just peak like human
The quote,
human thinking we're so smart. We're like, like this regulates that. Like we'll just change this, and like this is peak Jurassic Park moment here. Like,
oh my gosh, I totally agree, Adrian. The quote at the bottom of the article is the best. Quote, "We don't understand this system as well as we thought we did." End quote.
Yep. Yeah.
Once again, I think this could be a life lesson here.
Question is, what are they doing with the Psycho Rage hamsters? I would love to get a Psycho Rage hamster. That could have some fun pranks involved.
Poor hamster.
I'm going to start a fundraiser to raise funds to get Jeff Goldblum to read this article.
Oh my gosh, that would be epic.
So preoccupied with doing it. Forgot to wonder whether they should.
So here on Enterprise Security Weekly, the best stories always involve psycho rodents.
And there are photos of the hamsters rumbling as well.
They
which I appreciate.
They're like wrestling hamsters in here.
Well, on WWE hamsters.
And they use CRISPR to do this as well. So these aren't genetically modified like at birth animals. They're actually modifying these animals. So these animals were somewhat lovable and coexisting happily as adult hamsters, before they use CRISPR to modify their genes.
I feel bad. How would you like it if you got shot up with something and all of a sudden became a rage hamster?
Rage hamster. Just the saying makes me laugh out loud.
It's terrible. Adorable bundles of fluff turned into mutant rage monsters. I feel so bad for these poor little Syrian hamsters.
It reminds me of a book I read where they encounter some aliens that, to the human eye, look like Care Bears. Basically, like they look like a mix between small bears and the fictional Care Bears, like teddy bears. But they are extremely hostile, and just go like will murder anything that doesn't look like them.
You finished this book too? You started it and finished it?
Yeah, I mean, it's not the main point of the book. It's kind of like a side note that's like later in the series. It's the Lost Fleet, like the second series in the Lost Fleet series. Beyond the Frontier. Yeah, if anybody's really interested, Beyond the Frontier is the name of that series. It's a lot of fun. It's pretty fun. It's like a military sci-fi series. Anyway,
on that note,
true squirrel. Like we're not only talking about non-security stuff here. We've gone down a rabbit hole after the rabbit hole or the hamster hole. Here.
Maybe the previous guy can get a rage hamster to chew a hole in his blinds so then he can now see out his window because he can't control it because of the exposed cert, the expired cert.
Should we try and combine squirrel stories in the future when we have more than one? See if we can find some way to tie them together?
Yeah, some scenario planning.
Lovely. Well, thank you, Tyler and Katie, for joining me today. It's been fun. It's been a while since we've all been together on the show.
It has. Good to see you again. I'm glad to be back, big head and all. So yeah, I'm excited. Let's do it again next week.
I can't wait. Not next week. Next week is RSA week.
Oh yeah.
But the week after that, we will be back, and we'll probably have a lot to talk about after RSA, I'm assuming.
Absolutely.
All right. Big thanks to everybody listening to this week's episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. We will be back not next week, but in 2 weeks. We'll see you then.